Hey guys, this is Miss Adelini. I'm going to be talking about the basics of cell signaling and more specifically the questions in your notes that have to do with reception and also response. You have 4 questions that need to be answered in your packet. So the first 2 questions have to do with reception. They ask about the types of signal molecules that bind to plasma membrane receptors and also bind to intracellular receptors. So the types of signal molecules that have to bind to a plasma membrane receptor on the surface of the cell membrane are going to be large, polar, or charged molecules. All 3 of these types of molecules cannot move through the plasma membrane on their own, so they have to bind to a receptor on the outside of the membrane. A large one can't move through the membrane on its own because it can't fit through the spaces in the lipid bilayer. Polar and charged molecules can't move through the plasma membrane on their own because they cannot move through the nonpolar tail region of the lipid bilayer. Nonpolar is another term for hydrophobic. That means the types of signal molecules that bind to intracellular receptors, receptors located inside the cell, have to be signal molecules that can pass through the cell membrane on their own. So for that reason, the types of signal molecules that bind to intracellular receptors are small. They've got to be able to fit through the spaces in the cell membrane, and they also have to be nonpolar, so they can pass through the nonpolar or hydrophobic tail region of the plasma membrane. Okay. We're going to skip the transduction step because you can read about that on your own. So let's go to the 2 questions that have to do with response. There are 2 types of responses that cells can make to the initial signaling molecule. The first is a nuclear response. A nuclear response occurs when the cell responds by regulating which genes are turned on or turned off. Now, all genes are used to create proteins that are going to be used in the cell. So a nuclear response would turn certain genes on if it wants to make a particular protein from those genes, or it would turn a gene off if it wants to stop creation of that protein. Okay, so the first question is, what type of receptor, plasma membrane or intracellular, is usually linked to a nuclear response? Typically, intracellular receptors have a double role in the cell. Usually, they can also act as transcription factors, which are molecules that can turn on genes and cause the creation of proteins from those genes. So intracellular receptors have a double role in the cell, and so they often elicit a nuclear response because they are also transcription factors. The other type of response is a cytoplasmic response, and instead of turning genes on or off in the nucleus, instead it regulates the activity of an enzyme that's normally found in the cytoplasm. It either activates the enzyme or inhibits the enzyme and prevents it from doing its job. Typically, a cytoplasmic response is associated with a plasma membrane receptor. That's because the plasma membrane receptor usually activates a second messenger molecule during the transduction step. We saw the example of cyclic AMP with the epinephrine fight or flight response. It also turns on protein kinases that will then activate enzymes like phosphorylase in our epinephrine example in the cytoplasm. So the plasma membrane receptors will initiate the transduction step, which will then turn on certain enzymes or turn them off. Okay, and that's it for this video.